The Nazis were not to be content with the burning of books.
Das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende.
The ideas in the books were to be destroyed, and all who persisted in believing in those ideas were to be destroyed as well.
Sondern auch ein Mensch des Charakters sein. Dazu wollen wir euch erziehen.
Dachau, a quiet community a few miles from Munich, noted only for the ferocity of its local brown shirts. It was here that the Nazis set up their first concentration camp to test the limits of their new power. They rounded up communists and churchmen, liberals and social democrats, all who opposed them. German society and the German courts turned a blind eye. The Nazis, a small band of determined extremists, had successfully overturned the central balance of government. At first, most Jews, bystanders in Weimar's extremist politics, were not subjected to the concentration camp unless they were politically active against the regime. But this was not long to remain the case. On the street, the Nazis presented the Jew as the enemy who moved all other enemies. They used the radicalism of a few Jews and the wealth of a few more as sticks with which to beat the whole community. Nazi hatred had no rational basis. It was, in essence, an amalgam of racial hysteria and prejudice, a dangerous paranoia. The early phase of Nazi rule was one of humiliation and public vilification, intermittent street violence, boycotts, and of signs saying, "Jews not wanted."
I had walked the streets in Berlin and saw milling crowds in front of various stores with Jewish names. I felt completely at a loss. I didn't know what it's all about until I came to the tobacconist, and I saw a very large crowd standing in front, yelling on top of their voices, "Juden raus, Juden raus." And suddenly my blood boiled over, and I made my way through this crowd, went into the shop. I felt this overwhelming anger at being considered by these people as a Jewess, whereas I myself considered myself a German. I was as German as they were. As I left the shop, the crowd outside had made for me a very narrow lane. I could barely walk through. I remember I kept on thinking in my head, just show dignity. Just show, don't be afraid, just show dignity. And they were yelling, "Go to Palestine, Judensau. Get out."
This haphazard persecution was not to be the shape that Nazi repression would take. Throughout the years when Hitler ruled in peace and Germany prospered, the Jewish community was devastated by law after law. Legislation denied the Jews all those rights which normally only the law can guarantee. The Nazis twisted every institution of government, regarded then and still seen today as vital to the protection of the citizen. It happened in three phases. First, from 1933, Jews excluded from the practice of law, no Jews allowed to work as civil servants, including teachers, professors, and doctors in public practice. No Jewish newspaper editors. In schools and universities, a quota system for Jewish students. Then, in 1935, the Nuremberg Decrees. Jews are declared second-class citizens with virtually no rights. All further social and sexual contact with their neighbors is prohibited. Then a third wave. By 1939, Jews would be totally excluded from any economic activity. Special identity cards would be required, and passports stamped with a J. Jews would be excluded completely from universities, beaches, sleeping cars, and dining cars on trains. Forbidden to drive private vehicles. Subject to arbitrary eviction by landlords or divorce by non-Jewish partners. Restricted to certain shopping hours. Gradually, the modern totalitarian state was taking shape, and within it, the Jew was becoming the ultimate outcast. All this was for less than 1 in 100 of the population. For there were only some 520,000 Jews in a Reich of 60 million. Yet for most of the others, life for the first time since the First World War was good. There were jobs again, not least because Germany was rearming, and Germany was once more respected in the world. In 1936, as a mark of this renewed stature, she hosted the Olympic Games. The country was cleaned up for the occasion. Jewish athletes were allowed to attend. Janet Flanner wrote in the New Yorker,
"For Germany, 1936 has been an Olympian season. Only a determined deaf and blind visitor to any corner of this land could fail to see and hear the sight and the sound of Germany's forward march."
It was a forward march that within 5 years was to engulf the whole of Europe. In every state bordering the Reich lived ancient German-speaking communities. Each one now became a pretext for Nazi intervention. Austria was first. But as the Greater Reich grew to contain more Germans, it also expanded to absorb more Jews. They were dealt with swiftly. The process of humiliation, expropriation, and terror, which had taken 5 years to develop in Germany, was unleashed in days and weeks. There were protests, as there had been from the very beginning. Mayor LaGuardia had proclaimed,
I am here this evening to join with my fellow New Yorkers in a great protest, not against the German people, but against the present German government.
But all voices of protest were buried. The 30s were a time of depression, political violence, and outright armed conflict. Far from being the most civilized of centuries, the 20th had begun to reveal the terrifying effects of new technologies. Wars raged around the globe, from China and Ethiopia to Spain. To contain the flood of war, Germany's neighbors developed a policy of appeasement. After Austria, Germany wanted and was given the German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was dismembered. In such a world, it is not surprising that the Jews were being left to their fate. In the courts and on the street, the Jews were constantly threatened. On November the 9th, 1938, Goebbels turned out the brown shirts for an orgy of burning and looting. Kristallnacht, the night of breaking glass. Every synagogue in Germany was attacked by the Nazis. 91 Jews died.
I stood there for maybe half an hour. There was not one attempt to put out the fire in the synagogue. My father was not there. He came back late that morning. He was in bad shape. We talked together, what's going to happen now? And one thing he did, and he suggested, he says, we got to get you out.
The truth was unambiguously clear after Kristallnacht. The Nazis had legally written the Jews out of society. Now they would physically expel them from the Reich. But where were the Jews to go? In 1938, the world was still suffering from depression and high unemployment. It was a world of visas, immigration quotas, and affidavits.
There was a family, a non-Jewish family living in Wilmington, Delaware, who had offered an affidavit for myself to get out. That affidavit, unfortunately, had a number next to it. That number was somewhere 18,000. And when we went to the American consulate to try to find out when I would be able to leave Germany, to immigrate to the United States, I was told that the year was 1942.
Yet some doors were ajar. Palestine was there as a haven. The Zionist dream was still alive. A virtual British colony since 1918, Palestine presented a most un-European face. It was an undeveloped, multi-ethnic Middle Eastern land, and for most immigrants, it offered a vivid contrast to the Europe that they had fled.
Above all, it was so completely different to anything I had known back home. The sharpness of the colors, the scents, the smells, and the variety of the people. Outside the cities, there were no trees, no woods, no rivers, no brooks. Just here and there, oases of dazzling flowers and citrus groves. And then unremitting sand.
And Toscanini conducted it as a protest against the European fascists. As more Jews arrived, relations with the Arab majority worsened. In 1939, the British responded to Arab unrest by limiting Jewish immigration to a total of 75,000 over 5 years, and then no more Jews at all. The door was to be slammed. The community protested, but the policy remained unchanged. It was a policy to be repeated by nation after nation. Nearly everywhere, the refugees were to be refused entry. This was a time of an exodus by every available route, a time of a wandering as tragic as any ever suffered by the Jews. 907 German Jews boarded the steamship, the St. Louis, heading for Cuba. They came within feet of safety, but were turned away. Pleading was useless. Next, they approached Miami, but the U.S. Coast Guard denied them entry. Unable to land in the New World, they were forced to return to the Old. The escape had failed. The opportunities for further escape attempts were fast disappearing. Throughout Europe, tensions were mounting. Once more, the world was on the brink. The Reich wanted Western Poland. September 1939. The Nazis crossed the Polish border and the world was at war. The word lightning, in German Blitz, acquired for all the peoples who lived between the North Sea and the Urals a frightful new meaning. The Nazis waged lightning war, Blitzkrieg, across an entire continent. Nation after nation was struck down. Total war involved people, ordinary people, in unprecedented numbers. Each conquest, and for 3 years there was little else, each conquest, especially in the east of Europe, added to the number of Jews within the Reich. For every Jew within his grasp in 1933, Hitler had nearly 20 in 1941. So to contain and control them, in all the cities of the East, the Nazis confined the Jews to what they termed ghettos. From Kazimierz, a suburb of the Polish city of Krakow, the Jews were herded together across the river into the poorest sections of the town. Facing the all-encompassing power of the Nazis, the Jews were doubly imprisoned, held in the ghettos, and surrounded by occupying armies. Physical resistance was futile, but moral resistance was everywhere. Forbidden public prayer, they prayed in secret. In back rooms, on long benches near a table, little schoolchildren sat and learned in secret. Jews worked. The Jews believed, needed to believe, that if the work was required, then so was the worker. Above all, there was a sense of foreboding. However hellish the ghetto, families were still intact. There was a semblance of order. But the Jews feared that worse was yet to come.
God, please let us stay here. Show us you are merciful. If my senses are accurate, this is the last paradise we will ever know. Please let us stay in this heavenly hell forever. We are tightly packed in the ghetto, but that must be a fine way to live in comparison to deportation. Did God take leave of his senses? Something terrible is coming. There are 7 of us in 9 feet of space. Let them put 14 together. 28. We will sleep on top of each other. We will get up at 3 a.m., not 4. Stand in line for 10 hours. Anything. Anything. Just let our family stay together.
$5,000 a month were dying of starvation and disease in Warsaw's ghetto. But this was not enough for the Germans. And now the Nazis made their unique contribution to the annals of European anti-Semitism. They no longer said, as had their medieval forebears, "You cannot live amongst us as Jews." They no longer said, as they themselves had for nearly a decade, "You cannot live amongst us." Now they said something new. They said, "You cannot live." As the Germans swept into the heart of the Jewish communities of Western Russia in 1941, close behind the front lines came the mobile killing squads of the SS. In the 16 months to the autumn of 1942, they and other members of the German army, as well as Ukrainian and Baltic pro-Nazis, shot nearly 1.5 million Jews, 2 human beings a minute, for every hour of every day for nearly 500 days. But the problem, as the Nazis termed it, persisted. Early in 1942, here at a villa in Wannsee outside Berlin, the leaders of the German government met in order to refine the plan already underway in the East of systematically murdering every last Jew in its control. By spring, the logistics of death were in place. Bureaucratic processes, down to the last minute detail of costing, supplies, and scheduling, were put to the service of murder.
We drag ourselves to the railroad station. The sun is mercilessly hot. People are fainting, babies screaming. We, the young and healthy teenagers, are totally spent. What must the old, the sick feel? Totally stripped of our dignity, leaving the town we were born in, grew up in. What happens after this long wait? Where are we off to? $75 to a car. No toilets, no doctors, no medication. We squeeze my mother into a sitting position on the backpack. Her face has an otherworldly look. She knows she will not live, but she wants us to live, desperately. All these years I have carried with me her face of resignation and hope and love. Stay alive, my darlings. All 6 of you. We started the journey of ugliness on May 29th. We headed for Auschwitz. We arrived on May 31st.
Our line moved slowly forward until we came face to face with an elegant SS man, leather coat, gloves, young man, and the thumb went up and the thumb went down. Up you lived, down you died. We didn't know what it meant. We had an idea.
The scent of spring wasn't delicious. The earth didn't smile. It shrieked in pain. The air was filled with the stench of death, unnatural death. The smoke was thick. The sun couldn't crack through. The scent was the smell of burning flesh. The burning flesh was your mother. I am condemned to walk the earth for all my days with the stench of burning flesh in my nostrils. My nostrils are damned. May is damned. May should be abolished. May hurts. There should be only 11 months in a year. May should be set aside for tears. For 6 million years to cleanse the earth.
Millions died, but contrary to the records made by the Nazis, they did not all die without protest. For despite the starvation and brutality and the unbridled power of their guards, some rebelled. In Auschwitz, in the lowest circle of hell, the special squad charged with the disposal of the dead attempted a revolt. In Treblinka, the underground blew up the arsenal and 200 inmates escaped. In Sobibor, the entire surviving population rebelled.
Comrades, forward! I shouted. The cries echoed through the camp as 600 of us, pain-racked and tormented, surged forward to life and freedom.
The grass has grown over many concentration camps: Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka, Theresienstadt, Bergen-Belsen. Perhaps the word monument is the best way of describing their significance today. There are across the world monuments to man's gift of beauty. There are monuments to man's creativity. There are monuments to man's wealth. Here, scattered over Europe, there are these monuments, monuments to human cruelty, suffering, anguish, and resistance. Ghettos are not preserved. Nevertheless, they offer witness to the strength of the human spirit. For here too, resistance, when weapons could be found and preparations made, became rebellion. In Bialystok, in Vilna, in 105 ghettos, there was armed resistance. In Warsaw, the young Jews, the under-20s, the radicals, ambushed the Nazis.
We were young boys and girls. We had no military training before. We prepared quite a big mine under the road where the Germans marched in. And we switched on and the mine exploded. And this was really the first time I saw dead Germans. The Germans, of course, were astonished. When they came nearer to us, we thrown them a handmade grenade. We had the Molotov bottles, and then again we saw our Germans burning like a torch. We just wanted to die with dignity. That's all what we wanted, and to take revenge.
After weeks of fighting, the Germans retook the ghetto, building by building. Elsewhere, resistance continued. Where the endless forests were in reach of the ghettos, thousands escaped to join the Soviet partisans, harassing the Nazis behind the lines. From the ghetto of Minsk alone, 10,000 fled to reinforce the fighters in the forest. All in all, one estimate says as many as 40,000 Jews were under arms in the east. Although these episodes had limited strategic significance, for the Jews they were a crucial step away from their traditional behavior. The responses of European Jewry to this persecution had been to no avail. Obedience to every last whim of their persecutors had brought them no respite. They faced the ultimate barbarity. It understood only power. So Jewish communities, however few, however futile their resistance, rose in arms against their oppressors. Beyond heroism, beyond the search for dignity in death, Jews came to understand the necessity of power. This was a crucial lesson. There is a lesson also in remembering the righteousness of ordinary people in every European nation. Denmark, until the fall of 1943, the quietest of Nazi occupations. The 7,500 Danish Jews lived in peace under the Nazis, unmarked and unenslaved. Orders were drawn up to begin deportations. The Danes refused to cooperate. Among the protests, a pastor cried from the pulpit, "I would rather die with the Jews than live with the Nazis." The Nazis planned the roundup for the Jewish New Year, September 1943. The Danes hid all but 477 Jews in factories, in hospitals, in private homes. Over the next several nights, the Jews were placed in boats, any boats, and ferried over the narrow waters to safe and neutral Sweden. The Danish Jews were blessed with neighbors who abhorred persecution of any kind. Others across Europe also found ways of protecting their Jewish neighbors. There were public demonstrations in Bulgaria. Swiss and Swedish visas were issued in Budapest. Everywhere at great risk, single Jews, or more often Jewish children, were hidden. Very few were saved, but each life is a testament to what might be called the Danish spirit. In contrast, the governments of the unenslaved world witnessed the genocide of the Jews almost in silence. And they did witness it. By the spring of 1944, the Allies knew the exact nature of the camps from Auschwitz escapees. But although Allied bombers flew over rail lines to the camp, the death trains were never disrupted. The Jews were not alone in their agony. In the camps, the Nazis murdered millions of Russians, Serbs, Poles, 1 out of 3 of Europe's Romani gypsies, all opposition, the mentally ill and the chronically sick, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals. Elsewhere, the innocent were also dying, sometimes in atrocities as bad as the camps. Here in Oradour in central France, on the morning of the 10th of June 1944, the Nazis murdered the entire population. They shot them